Wilder's story, which I'd love to share with you all because I think that it's really important to understand the differences when we get to start to work with blank canvases compared to horses that have suffered abuse in their past. And sadly, this is Wylder's case. So Wylder's story goes a little bit like this. I first met Wylder when he was actually called Hubble. So this horse that I was told had been rescued, I met when I was first looking at Yarden, his half brother. So I went to look at Yarden to purchase because I knew Yarden had a behavioural bolting issue and I was going to look at him. And then I met all Yarden's previous owner's other horses, and she had four other Frisians, and one of those was Wylder, which back then he was called Hubble. So she had mentioned a little bit because when I went to pat all of the Frisians, he was the only one that stood quite far back in the paddock and everyone else came up for a pat except him. So at that point, she told me that, yeah, she had rescued him. And at that point in time, that's all that I knew about him. So and as you know, Yarden's story, so I went and purchased Yarden off her. And obviously we kept in touch because I was very wanting to let her know about Yarden's progress, and she was really interested. And it wasn't until nearly 12 months later that that she called me up and said, would I like to have Hubble? And that's when I found out his full history on what had actually happened to him. Okay, so the story goes, Hubble was found at a property that his owner, who was a racehorse trainer, had been neglecting the large amount of horses that he had on the property. So they were not just underconditioned, they had been physically and mentally abused, and they had been reported. So this racehorse trainer had been reported for his abuse of the animals. He actually had been charged or reported, and I don't know how they work that, but his training racehorse license had been taken off him, so he could not be involved in horse race training. That's how severe the abuse had been. And Hubble was amongst these horses. So Hubble had been one of his personal ridden horses. He'd also, what I have been told, was broken to carriage. So he had had really heavy gear, and they don't know the damage that had done to his body, because I don't know if it was from the harness or from the ill-fitting gear that he'd had on his body. He is 3/4 Frisian and 1/4 thoroughbred, and at that time they'd found him, and he was about 5, I believe, 5 years old. And so he was going to, all the horses were all sent to the Echuca sales. And this is where Yarden's previous owner had heard about him because someone had got in touch with her saying that Hubble had his sire was Yarden's, and she had actually another Frisian by the same sire. She bought I think she'd bought 3 in total off the stud at the time. So she was really interested in Hubble to help him because of the relationship with her Frisians at home. And she had gone and purchased him through the sales, and brought him home. And when she'd got him home, she'd popped him out in a paddock, and he basically didn't want to have anything to do with a human at all. She said that it was a good 6 months for him just settling in, not coming near humans, just wanting to be left alone. He was in really obviously poor body condition as well, so he would eat, but he took a very long time to put on condition, and he was really absolutely terrified of men. So, so when I had been offered him, these are the things that she needed to let me know, that he doesn't like men, and that he is going to take a long time to settle in. And before all this, I'd actually said to her that I wasn't at that time wanting to take on any more horses, because I already had enough on my plate, and that I would help her find a really good home for him, because at this time my best friend, who also had a Frisian with behavioural issues, her Frisian was getting older, so I thought she could be a really good match for him, being female and knowing the breed, because they're a very special breed to work with. They're probably one of the hardest to work with out of all the breeds that I've ever worked with, and it's really especially coming from his background of the abuse, she wanted someone with really kind skills to for him to go to. But previous to that, this story, what happened was, she'd had him for 6 months. He'd finally settled in. He finally started to trust her, and she was had been just hacking him out and trail riding with quiet horses, and he was enjoying that. And in about the 18-month time, because he was just very casual, and she wanted to sort of just stick with the purebreds, she decided to put him up for sale. And it was at this time that she had a girl coming to look at him and wanting him for dressage, because he's got beautiful high carriage movement. And so the girl had actually tried him, and then she'd come back for a second ride, and he bucked her off. So he was clearly stating that he didn't want that person taking him home, going home with her. So this is where she'd then contact me and said, look, he does buck, and I just want him to go to a really good home, just because I know he's passed, because this racehorse trainer, like I said, been charged with the abuse. He was in that state of since pretty much a yearling. So it wasn't like just a short amount of time that Hubble had this. And I call him Hubble at this stage because the story, once I'd reached out to my friend, and she said, look, she couldn't really take him on just because she'd have to keep him at her parents, and they were thinking about selling, so it was a bit too much for her to try and make sure that he had a stable home to go to. And it was actually my husband Andrew said, you need to take him, like well, I can't believe you're not taking a Frisian and like another Frisian, like so. But for me, it wasn't about just getting a free horse because they're my family. I don't want to sell him. I knew his past. I wanted to make sure that I could be completely committed to this horse before I took him on. But thinking about that, and I actually, my next point of call was then to actually do a communication session with him while he was still at the place, just because I wanted to know why he did what he did to the girl that came to buy him. And so I did a communication session with him, and his answers were very, very clear that he didn't want to leave. He had felt really loved and taken care of in the kindest way, and he'd had no pressure put on him, and he really had appreciated and loved that owner. So I was really in a bit of turmoil in the way of going, okay, well, I need to let his owner know how he felt, and that's why he did what he did. And so I did let her know, so he did that because he really wants to stay with you. He really loves being with you, and he feels that that's his home now. And at this point, she was like, well, I really can't keep him, so it's probably best that we find him the right home. And that was then my decision was made up. Well, there's no other choice for him to come. He knows Yarden. He remembered Yarden from where he was there when Yarden was there with him. And so I said, yep, okay, I'm going to take him. And I actually, before, because they even offered to bring him to me, before I even did anything else, I did another communication session with him because I wanted to make sure that I tried, and I couldn't do what he requested, but I said I was going to try hard for him to know that this was always going to be his home, and that he was safe here, that he was going to be with his half brother, and that he'd know someone when he arrived, so he didn't have to feel that it was going to be a big sort of hard transition again for him in his life. And that all went really, really well.
When he arrived, just spending so much beautiful liberty and just low-key bonding time together. And eventually our first rides, just keeping him lovely and relaxed.
Okay, so when he arrived, I made sure I had Yarden all ready to greet him, and the two of them really hit it off again, and we're really happy to be together again, which was so wonderful. It was really beautiful to see that first moment of them being back together. And it was interesting because it was like I was warned that I might not be able to get near him, and or like don't worry if that's the case, and it might take him a little while to settle in. This wasn't the case with Wylder. I was being able to, he was just so thankful that he had come here. He would come up to me and want cuddles and just be there, even though he was still a little bit anxious about his new surroundings. He settled in really good, and I actually did another communication session with him, and that's when he wanted his name to be changed. He wanted like a blank slate, and pretty much to wipe the old past of what had happened to him with his abuse, and to start again. So he requested something which sort of implied freedom, and so that's why we came up with Wylder, like he's wild and free. And he has pretty much not looked back from that point on. Obviously, when I first got him here, all I did was just some fun liberty with him. He was actually terrified of whips, which I had to help work through, that it wasn't a device used for abusing him, and that it was just an extension of my arm. So we had to go through all of that with him. And when I did first ride him, I made sure I had the saddle fitter out, because she showed me where all the scar tissue was on his back, so we could make sure that we found everything that would fit him 100%. And so I gradually did only very, very small amounts of work with this horse, because I did not want him to think that there was any pressure here. And so I did some liberty. I do a little bit of ridden training at points, just taking everything really, really slow and easy, and to help, welcoming here, knowing that, most of the time he was just going to be a lovely paddock ornament out in the paddock with his brother Yarden. And then I think one of the most specialist moments was when we all went out for a trail ride as a family. So, because at the start, obviously, he was a bit wary of my husband, Andrew, but Andrew just made sure that he was not mean, or giving off anything to imply that he was ever going to hurt him. And we went out on a family trail ride, and Andrew got to ride Wylder, and Wylder was okay with that, and we had a really lovely time with Yarden and Wylder out and the kids, and they all did a really, really beautiful job together. And so most of the time, yes, he is pretty much a lovely paddock ornament here, and I've spent just a little bit of training here and there, and the most training he's ever had is probably been this last 6 weeks worth for getting ready for Baroque. And to say he's done an amazing job, I can't be more prouder. I only started riding him bareback when you guys saw me do the switch onto Yarden, so I'd actually never ridden that boy bareback, so I just asked him to 100% trust me on this, and he listened, and he did everything that I could ask for from bareback. And I can remember on the weekend just walking him out in front of that massive crowd, riding him bareback, going, "You're just the most amazing horse." Like, that atmosphere, to be honest, I did not expect that many people at that event. The previous Baroque, as you saw the photos, were lucky to be 250 people there, not thousands. So we threw poor Wylder in the deep end on that, but as you could see, he was not a crazy running around galloping horse that was terrified of being around the crowd. He took it in, and he was more curious than anything else, which for me is such a beautiful thing to see him just blossom into the horse he is today, because of how the start that he had received. So yeah, so that's Wylder's story. I've got a little bit of footage there for you to have a little look at. And yeah, now he's 10, and like I said, he's going to be living here happily ever after, because that's what he deserves.
Our very special first ride out as a family with the two Frisian brothers. Wylder enjoying his trail riding, and very, very special, loves his girls. He's definitely a ladies' man.